Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies and today on The Detail. New French flair versus established Kiwi grunt. The Bs versus the As. Yes, we are talking the French All Black series. So, ahead of the next test tomorrow night, which team is the odds-on favourites?
Well, the short answer is it's France. I don't know what the hell I'm expecting, Amanda, to be honest. It could go either way.
And a wise warning from a man who knows his stuff.
Don't put a large amount of money that you can't afford on it, for goodness sake, because you might make your fortune. But on the other side of the coin, it is France. And anybody who bets large amounts of money either for or against France in rugby is really not being very sensible.
That's longtime rugby guru and sports journalist Phil Gifford. Today we talk all things rugby, including the understrength but overperforming French side, Scott Barrett's injury, Ardie Savea's captaincy, whether refs have it in for our boys in black, TMOs, and that hottest of topics, the number 10 jersey. But to kick off our chat, I asked Phil what he thought of the first test last Saturday.
Well, I thought it was an extraordinary game, quite surreal in many ways, because everybody expected the poor old French, I think, to be thrashed. I thought the French played exceptionally well. I thought that we played well in patches, but by and large, it was one of the most weird test matches I've seen, but I certainly don't feel depressed about the All Blacks' prospects for this season.
Oh, I like that, Phil. Just on the French team, and there's been so much commentary around this. Is it their top side, or is this really sort of just a B team dressed up as a challenge?
No, it's definitely not their top side. But one of the things about the French, and I was talking with a dear friend who played rugby over there some years ago, Dave from Dunedin, and he was telling me they've had this system for about 5 or 6 years there, I believe now. Now, I would embarrass myself if I tried to tell it to you in French, but it is a 4-word title, and the acronym is GIF, J-I-F-F. And translated, it basically means players who are within the training system. And the French Rugby Federation have really done a magnificent job in the last 4 or 5 years of developing their younger players. And they, for example, in the Under-21 World Championships, in the last 4 championships, they won 3 of them and were runners-up in the 4th one. And so what we saw, I think, which was very threatening if you're going to be playing France over the next few years, what we saw in Dunedin was a handful of hardened veterans, just a handful, 5 guys playing their first test match who played as if they'd been in the team for several years. And I can't help but feel part of the reason that those younger players were so good and looked so comfortable was because they obviously spent so much time training, I would imagine, with the more experienced players.
Is that something we need to do? Do we need to take a leaf out of their book?
Hell yes. And the thing is, though, to be fair to New Zealand rugby, we are starting to. For some reason, we seem to get fairly blasé about the under-20s because we often won that championship, in the past. And we just seem to get fairly casual about it. I think those days, thankfully, are behind us, and that New Zealand now and New Zealand rugby, the people in charge of the game here, my impression is very much that they have really taken a leaf from that French book.
Good. I read somewhere that they are basically building for the next World Cup, the French. Do you agree with that? And should we be very worried about the next World Cup?
First of all, yes, they are absolutely building towards the next World Cup. So that's one thing. Should we be worried? Should always be worried about the French. I mean, I've been lucky enough to report on every Rugby World Cup going back to 1987. And I've seen the French do things in the World Cup where you go, that's ridiculous. How do they manage to do that? And that was when they weren't well organised as they are now. They're just on their own sort of imagination and brilliance and extraordinary temperament. I mean, they've done things back in 1999 when they beat us at Twickenham in the semi-final, and we were red-hot favourites to go to the final in 99. believe it or not, they had a revolution, and they said to the coach of the time, the French coach of the time, you were allowed to come to training, you were allowed to travel on the team bus with us, you're allowed to stay in the same hotel with us, but if you talk to one of us, we won't play the semi-final. And so there was a total players' revolution. The French will always be tricky at a World Cup. I think, if anything, they're going to be more difficult at the next one because they are perhaps putting a layer of real organisation into their game that perhaps they haven't had in the past, where they've relied more, maybe, on individual brilliance.
It's interesting because out of all the teams, they are the ones that worry me the most because they are so unpredictable. But Phil, our starting 15, is this really our best side at the moment, or do you think some of the players are there more based on reputation rather than, say, recent form?
Well, the thing about an All Black team is, Amanda, is that, and you know and I know, and certainly there are players that I would have in that side that aren't there, and some players in the team that I might possibly not. We are a nation of 5 million selectors, no question about that.
Absolutely.
Us amateur selectors always know more than the official selectors, but there are some players that, I must admit, I find it extraordinary that Ethan Blackadder's not in the squad because I thought he was the outstanding forward.
You and me both, Phil. Goodness.
Yeah, that is a very strange non-selection to me. But by and large, this is because of injury too. There are, well, for example, poor Sevu Reece, who had that horrific-looking head knock in the first 34 seconds of the game, I think it was, in Dunedin.
This is a problem here with Sevu Reece. Yeah, he instantly sparked out.
He's out, of course, and our captain, Scott Barrett, is out. So they've had some changes forced on them by injury. It's, to be blunt, and I know this sounds like a cop-out, Amanda, because it is a cop-out. I think it's too early. It's too early to tell. We will know a lot better even after 3 test matches against this French side, whether we are totally on the right track. They struggled a bit last year, and this year, I think the huge game is at Eden Park in September against South Africa. And that will tell us, that's the game that will tell us everything we need to know about whether we are on the right track, because South Africa, who are playing an absolutely brutal, forward-dominated strength and just massive forwards, smashing people to the ground. Unfortunately, it's not a style of rugby that I particularly enjoy. I quite like seeing wingers score tries rather than rolling mauls, but it is one that wins World Cups. And so if the All Blacks in September at Eden Park can actually get the better of South Africa, then we will know we are 100% on the right track. If it doesn't go so well, then start worrying.
Now, the number 10 jersey, that's always a hot topic. Is Richie Mo'unga's absence being felt, do you think, or are we okay?
Well, we have 2 terrific football players with very different styles to Richie Mo'unga and Beauden Barrett and Damien McKenzie, of course. Are we missing Richie Mo'unga, though? Yes, I think definitely, because gradually over time he became a veteran, as you do, and whether he will be back next year, perhaps he will be. I mean, if you've got Barrett, who is a world-class player, McKenzie, who's a world-class player, Mo'unga, who's a world-class player, but I don't believe that one of them is that much better than the next one. So who they eventually settle on, I will find absolutely fascinating. My feeling is that ultimately, if he's available, they will go with Richie Mo'unga.
I hope so. Big fan. What about, though, you just mentioned Scott Barrett, captain, he's out with that calf injury.
To sport, and All Black skipper Scott Barrett is out for the remainder of the Test series against France after picking up a calf injury midway through the second half of the opening win in Dunedin.
Do we know what the latest is with him? I mean, and how big a sort of hit is this for the side?
He will be out for the French for the next 2 tests against France, and apparently he could even be out for the opening game against Argentina in the Rugby Championship. So, yes, it is definitely a blow because Barrett has proven himself, I think, with the Crusaders and with the All Blacks. He's that sort of solid guy that you know every game he's going to go out there and leave absolutely everything on the field. And again, that's easy to say, but it's a hell of a lot harder to do. And when you watch Barrett in the last quarter of a game, that's when I think Scott Barrett is actually at his best, because he really, really is an absolute workhorse, and he's also extremely good on defence. He's terrific on defence, and so he is a hell of a blow. Artie Savia, who I think all of us love Artie Savia. How could you not?
Do.
I mean, he's a lovely guy. He plays, and for Moana Pacifica, he's just played his heart out during the Super Rugby Pacifica.
As he so often does, directing his orchestra, Artie Savia at the moment. Looking to play a tune down the short side, Savia. Can he get the bounce? He can! Can he score the try? He absolutely can! Oh, that is special from Artie Savia.
He's a fabulous footballer. I've got to say at the moment, I don't know, are we expecting a bit too much of Artie? Because he looked to me absolutely wrung out at the end of Super Rugby. But fingers crossed, he is the sort of guy that I would imagine, for example, in this next test coming up in Wellington, he will be playing the way he always does for 80 minutes of non-stop action.
Because if not Artie, Phil, who's the next potential captain?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, isn't it? Short answer is I absolutely have no idea. Because the other potential leaders are guys like, for example, I rate Cody Taylor very highly, really highly, both as a player and as a leader. But, you know, Cody's well into his 30s. Is there a young player in that squad putting his hand up and saying, pick me, because I'm going to be your next captain? I mean, one of the things is perhaps we go back to the idea of the guys that see the ball the most in the game, possibly, and this is a real long shot because I don't know if he's ever captained any team in the whole of his life, but I'm terribly impressed with Cam Roigard, the halfback.
It's been ripped away by Roigard. Oh, what a brilliant try by Cameron Roigard. He's stolen that one right in front of the French faces.
Who I just think's playing terrific football. And also, I don't know the young man. I've never actually had the chance to interview him, but I do notice that on the field, like all halfbacks are actually, he doesn't lack for confidence, and he certainly doesn't seem embarrassed to tell people what they should be doing. So maybe those two things are attributes that somewhere down the line will help him if he did become the captain.
It was Roigard, of course, who set up that first try for the All Blacks last Saturday night.
And now the break from Cam Roigard. He's got Barrett with him. Johnny Barrett for the corner, and he's in. First try of the year for the All Blacks. Oh, two pieces of brilliance. No try. There's a knock on.
Yes, you heard that right. No try. One of three by the All Blacks disallowed during the game.
Through the hands it goes, and Jordan is in.
Try is no good. We're going to go back for an obstruction.
You can easily get frustrated by, three opportunities that do get turned down after being awarded. It's certainly a mental trap that he could fall into, but I was pleased with the way the boys hung in there, and I guess the French sort of hung in there as well.
The disallowed tries, along with some other controversial calls, prompted New Zealand Herald sports journalist Gregor Paul to ask if referees have a bias against the All Blacks. Fans, of course, replied, hell yes. So are they right, or is this just classic Kiwi paranoia?
Well, I found it a really interesting story, and one of the things about it is it set me to thinking, well, is it just me being one-eyed, thinking, oh, we're getting picked on, or Kiwis being one-eyed and thinking, oh, we're getting picked on? And funnily enough, my feeling for what it's worth is that we're suffering from a hangover from the days when Richie McCaw was the captain. Because when Richie was the captain, and not many of us in New Zealand, in fact, I don't think anybody in New Zealand wrote this, but there were plenty of writers overseas that did, rugby writers, Richie just had the referees eating out of his hand, man. They were kind of in awe of him because he is one of the all-time great rugby players. Not a good rugby player at international level, a great rugby player, the best number 7 I've ever seen. He is one of those guys, and in New Zealand rugby, I would suggest the only other guy I can think of in more than 50 years of writing and talking about New Zealand rugby as a journalist, Brian Lahore's the only other one.
Oh,
there are
nice.
some people you meet, aren't there, men and women, who you just want them to think well of you. So they don't have to shout to get what they want done because you don't want to upset them because they've got an aura about them. He just had referees, never shouted at them, never even glared at them really, But referees, at times you could almost see them thinking, is that all right, Richie? Is it all right if I give a penalty here? Sort of thing, So maybe the reason that we feel that the referees have turned against us is because once upon a time, Richie had them in his hip pocket.
Sadly for the All Blacks, Richie is long gone, and many are now wondering if it's time for rugby television match officials to take a step back too. Here is Sky Sports' The Breakdown discussing TMOs this week.
If you're talking about a TMO comes in, that should just be the call for knock-ons and that. If there's a bit of interpretation in there, but you don't need to spend 2 minutes and 27 seconds to review something. We're talking about taking away scrums and mauls because the game's slow, but we've got TMOs going for almost 3 minutes. Time to get up and grab a fresh cold one. You don't need that in a game of rugby.
Well, the fact is that rugby, especially now, you've got 2 assistant referees that are mic'd up to the referee. You've got a television match official. You've also got, it's very embarrassing to me, I didn't realise, you also had last weekend, they've got a rough play sort of television official that's just there for rough play as well. So you've got so many eyes on it. And the television match official, on the one hand, I agree with the idea that if a try is scored and television replays showed, this is going back to the dark ages when they didn't have television match officials, if a try is scored and television replays show that patently the ball was dropped or knocked on or something, that's an embarrassment to the game. But on the other side of the coin, the fact is there are so many rules in rugby now, and you have, at times, I think, television match officials in particular, who they're almost obsessed with finding something wrong. And so are the All Blacks less disciplined than they used to be? No, I don't believe they are. I don't think anything's changed at all. The difference is that every time they take a breath, it's examined by about 3 or 4 pairs of eyes. And it's going back to it, it's not just New Zealand, although it feels like it when we're watching, because we want the All Blacks to be given the rub of the green, don't we? Of course we do, because we're Kiwis, and that's how we grew up. But on the other side of the coin, I just think that it's one of the prices you pay for having the game so, I think, almost ridiculously now scrutinised.
Yeah, I feel like it's sort of almost sucking the air out of the game.
Yeah, totally. It is. And because a try scored, and once upon a time, whether you're at the ground, you clapped and cheered and jumped up and down or whatever you did, or it was in your living room, you did the same thing. But now a try scored and you think, don't go to the TMO, don't go to the TMO, don't go to the TMO. But 9 times out of 10, they do.
Oh, I'm with you. I want to talk the next game in Wellington. The French have obviously never beaten the All Blacks in our capital. What are you expecting, Phil?
Well, the short answer is it's France. I don't know what the hell I'm expecting, Amanda, to be honest. It could go either way. If we go right back, and this is a bit embarrassing in the expression of how extremely aged I am, but one of the first rugby tests I ever saw, my father took me when I was still, I think I was in about the 4th form at high school. He took me to Eden Park and we watched the All Blacks play France in the first ever France All Black test in New Zealand. And the All Blacks won 13-6 and they deserved to win, but it was a fairly close game. Next test in Wellington was the famous Hurricane test where there was just a gale blowing and the match really shouldn't have been played. And in my memory, the All Blacks sneaked in, I think, 5-3. Then they went to Christchurch, and I can't remember what the score was, but it was like the All Blacks knocked up 30 points, and the French basically were just, who cares, play your game. I just want to get on the plane and go back to Paris, And so it is a very unwise person, I think, who predicts exactly what might happen. But my feeling would be another close game.
Now, last one for you. Scott Robinson, coach. How's he doing?
So far, there's been a huge mixed reaction, and it does take a while for every All Black coach to get their feet under the table. And I suppose if you really want to say an All Black coach that struggled initially, go back to Sir Graham Henry. In 2007, I was in Cardiff almost in tears in the press box watching us getting beaten by France in the quarterfinal of the 2007 Rugby World Cup. I think it's still too early to say how Razor Robertson's doing. I think he has made bolder selections this year than he did last year. He sort of stuck with the status quo a bit last year, I think. But I think this year they're taking more chances. And so fingers crossed, if they can play to their capabilities, because they could have easily won by quite a lot that test in Dunedin. When you look, as you mentioned, Amanda, there's 3 disallowed tries. If we got even 2 of those, would have made a hell of a difference to the scoreline. So if they can beat France reasonably convincingly and take the series, that would be good. But the real test will be South Africa in September at Eden Park. I think that if you're the All Black coach, you're under such intense scrutiny. And one of the things I think in the first season, I don't see how it could not have knocked him about a bit. He went from being the coach of the Crusaders, where in Christchurch, quite rightly, people kind of worshipped him.
He is a winner after all. He's won 6 titles in 6 years with the Crusaders. You can't look past his success.
And that was fair. If he walked down the street, every person wanted to speak to him and all of them wanted to say nice things to him, you know. So with an All Black coach, suddenly it's very different. One of the things that he has done is surely he and his selectors have put to bed the idea that he is one-eyed about the Crusaders when it comes to picking the All Blacks, because the Crusaders quite deservedly beat the Chiefs in the final of Super Rugby, as we know, and yet the Chiefs had more players in the All Black squad than the Crusaders did. Now, if that's not a sign that he's actually not just a one-eyed biased cantab these days, then what is?
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Phil Gifford. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Steve Burridge. I'm Amanda Gillies. Matua.